From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I had a woman sitting in an airplane, and I attacked her while people were coming onto the plane, and I have a #1 bestseller out. I mean, it was a total phony story. There are many of them. So when you say, does it affect me in terms of my thinking with respect to Judge Kavanaugh? Absolutely, because I've had it many times.
President Trump lashes out at the women who have accused him and his Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, of sexual assault, saying Democrats are running a con game. We'll speak with Jessica Leeds, the woman in the plane Trump referred to, one of 16 Trump accusers. She says he groped her in the first-class cabin of a commercial flight in the 80s.
It was a real shock when all of a sudden his hands were all over me. But it's when he started putting his hand up my skirt. And that was it. That was it.
We'll also speak with Lily Bernard, artist and actor, who's accused Bill Cosby of drugging and raping her when he mentored her for The Cosby Show in the 90s. Bill Cosby was just sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. Then we go to Yale University, where students at Yale Law School wore Black Monday protesting their alumnus Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation.
We want these allegations to be taken fully seriously by our senators, and we are urging them to give as much process to these individuals as possible.
Finally, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro speaks at the United Nations General Assembly just a day after Trump accused him of corruption and announced new sanctions against Venezuela.
Despite all of the differences, which could be considered abysmal, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Moros, would be willing, I am willing, to reach out my hand to the president of the United States and sit down to talk about the issues of bilateral differences and the issues of our region.
We'll speak with Vijay Prashad, author of The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the professor who's accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her when they were both teenagers, is set to testify along with Kavanaugh today ahead of a confirmation vote set for Friday by the Senate Judiciary Committee, even as new allegations against Kavanaugh continue to emerge. In Dr. Blasey Ford's prepared testimony released Wednesday, she calls Kavanaugh, quote, the boy who sexually assaulted me, and describes the night of the assault, stating, I believed he was going to rape me. She adds, quote, I don't have all the answers and I don't remember as much as I would like to, but the details about that night bring me here today are ones I will never forget. Kavanaugh has denied Dr. Blasey Ford's accusation, as well as other allegations of sexual misconduct made public by 2 other women this week. On Wednesday, a new accuser, Julie Swetnick, came forward with help from lawyer Michael Avenatti and alleged in a sworn declaration that she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 80s participating in efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. She says Kavanaugh was present at a party in which she herself was the victim of a gang rape. Speaking from the United Nations at the second solo news conference of his presidency, Trump did not once mention the names of Kavanaugh's accusers. Instead, he attacked Julie Swetnick's lawyer, Michael Avenatti, and accused Democrats of running a con game aimed at derailing the nomination.
People are going to have to make a decision. 36 years, there's no charge. All of a sudden, the hearings are over, and the rumors start coming out. And then you have this other con artist, Avenatti, come out with another beauty today. I only say that you have to look at the facts.
Republican Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley has scheduled a vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation for Friday. On Wednesday, Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon said he's suing President Trump and Senate Republican leaders. Merkley is seeking a federal court injunction to stop Kavanaugh's confirmation process, saying Republican leaders have obstructed senators' constitutional duty to advise and consent on Supreme Court nominees. Today's hearing comes as right-wing dark money groups have spent heavily in support of Kavanaugh's nomination. The Judicial Crisis Network spent $1.5 million last week on a 30-second ad featuring Kavanaugh's longtime friend, Louisa Gary. But since the ad aired, Gary has withdrawn her support for Kavanaugh amidst accusations by Deborah Ramirez, who says Kavanaugh exposed himself and thrust his genitals in her face during a college party in a Yale dorm room when they were both students there. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, protests against Kavanaugh's nomination echoed through the halls of Congress again on Wednesday. Outside Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins' office, police led protesters away in plastic handcuffs as they chanted, "We believe survivors." We believe survivors! We believe survivors! Among those protesting on Capitol Hill Wednesday was actress Alyssa Milano, who responded to President Trump's attacks on Dr. Christine Blasey Ford this week by saying for the first time that she, too, had been sexually assaulted twice as a teenager. In an essay for Vox, Milano wrote, quote, "The courage of survivors will always be stronger than Donald Trump's misogyny. The lives of survivors will always be more important than Brett Kavanaugh's career," unquote. CNN reports hours after Wednesday's protest, Senator Susan Collins said in a private meeting she's concerned over the latest allegations against Judge Kavanaugh, questioning why the Senate Judiciary Committee had not subpoenaed Kavanaugh's longtime friend Mark Judge, an alleged witness to crimes committed by Kavanaugh. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, another crucial vote on Kavanaugh's nomination, has also expressed concerns over the allegations. At the United Nations, President Trump gavelled in a meeting of the Security Council Wednesday as the U.S. took over the rotating position of Council President. In prepared remarks, Trump once again attacked Iran over its alleged nuclear ambitions. He also singled out China for allegedly meddling in the upcoming U.S. midterm elections. Later, Trump held an 81-minute solo news conference, just the second of his presidency, in which he railed against Kavanaugh's accusers and dismissed reports he was being laughed at when he addressed the General Assembly Tuesday as fake news. We'll have more on Trump at the United Nations later in the broadcast. Trump's appearance at the UN Security Council came as critics of the U.S. administration took to the floor of the General Assembly Wednesday. In a fiery address, Bolivian President Evo Morales said the U.S. was uninterested in supporting democracies, pointing to its long history of financing coups and supporting dictators. Morales cited the case of Iran.
In 1953, the United States financed, planned and implemented a coup d'etat against a democratically elected government, which, in exercise of its legitimate sovereignty, nationalized its oil production, wresting it from the hands of an Anglo-U.S. company. After that, for many decades, the United States supported an authoritarian government, which allowed the profits from oil production to line the pockets of transnational companies. This situation endured until the revolution of 1979. And now that Iran has retaken control of its own resources, it is once again the victim of a U.S. siege.
President Trump said Wednesday he has no immediate plans to fire Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's overseeing Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Earlier this week, the New York Times reported Rosenstein had suggested secretly recording President Trump in the White House and recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office for being unfit. Trump was due to meet Rosenstein today to discuss his future at the Justice Department. But the president said at Wednesday's news conference at the UN he may delay that meeting until after today's Senate hearing with Judge Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford.
I would much prefer keeping Rod Rosenstein. Much prefer. Many people say I have the right to absolutely fire him. He said he did not say it. He said he does not believe that.
In Oregon, students at Portland State University are calling on administrators to disarm campus police 3 months after a pair of officers fatally shot 45-year-old Jason Washington as he tried to break up a bar fight on campus. Police body cam video of the killing shows campus police officers Sean McKenzie and James Dewey opening fire on Washington with 9 bullets after a handgun Washington was wearing on his hip fell from its holster during a tussle. Earlier this month, the grand jury declined to indict the officers over the killing. Portland State University's Board of Trustees voted in 2015 to arm campus police officers. Students at PSU set up an Occupy-style encampment outside the campus security office, demanding they reverse the policy. In southern Mexico, federal and state police have disarmed the entire police force of the resort city of Acapulco, issuing arrest warrants for a pair of police commanders accused of carrying out killings on behalf of drug cartels. Soldiers, Marines, and state police will take over security in the city of 800,000 people. Last year, Acapulco had one of the highest murder rates in the world. And in Mexico City, friends and relatives of 43 students who vanished from the Ayotzinapa Teachers School in 2014 met with Mexico's president-elect, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, on Wednesday on the 4th anniversary of the students' disappearance. The students were attacked by local police in 2014 and are presumed dead. International experts say the Mexican military and federal police also played a role in their disappearance. This is Epifanio Alvarez, father of missing student Jorge Alvarez.
We have been filled with rage because we have not had a government that has cared about the case of the 43 disappeared students, the young boys who we are waiting for very anxiously. We are anxiously to hug and kiss them and say, "I love you, son." This is what we are waiting for.
López Obrador, who's set to be inaugurated as Mexico's president on December 1st, Wednesday reaffirmed his promise to create a truth commission to investigate the Ayotzinapa disappearances.
My commitment is that we will carry through with the investigation that will bring us to the truth and justice. During my campaign, I made the commitment to help clarify all that has happened with this very unfortunate case of the disappearance of the young boys of Ayotzinapa. We will keep to our promise.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Today, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the professor who's accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her when they were both teenagers, is set to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, even as new allegations continue to emerge and a confirmation vote is set for Friday. In Dr. Blasey Ford's prepared testimony released Wednesday, she calls Kavanaugh, quote, "the boy who sexually assaulted me," and describes the night of the assault, stating, "I believed he was going to rape me." She adds, quote, "I don't have all the answers, and I don't remember as much as I would like to, but the details about that night that bring me here today are ones I'll never forget." Speaking from the United Nations at the second solo news conference of his presidency, Trump did not once mention the names of Kavanaugh's accusers. Instead, he attacked Julie Swetnick's lawyer, Michael Avenatti, and accused Democrats of running a, quote, con game aimed at derailing the nomination.
But, Mr. President, if I could follow up, you have daughters. Can you understand why a victim of sexual assault would not report it at the time? Don't you understand?
By the way, I only say this. 36 years, no charge, no nothing.
But that happens often. I mean,
people are going to have to make a decision. 36 years, there's no charge. All of a sudden, the hearings are over, and the rumors start coming out. And then you have this other con artist, Avenatti, come out with another beauty today. I only say that you have to look at the facts.
Meanwhile, Kavanaugh has denied Dr. Blasey Ford's accusation, as well as other allegations of sexual misconduct made public by two other women this week. On Wednesday, a new accuser, Julie Swetnick, came forward with help from lawyer Michael Avenatti and alleged in a sworn declaration that she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 1980s, participating in efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. She says Kavanaugh was present at a party in which she herself was the victim of a, quote, gang rape. In a statement released by the White House, Kavanaugh called Swetnick's claims, quote, ridiculous and from the Twilight Zone. On Wednesday, Trump called the allegations against Kavanaugh a big fat con job and said he, too, had faced false allegations.
I had a woman sitting in an airplane, and I attacked her while people were coming onto the plane, and I have a #1 bestseller out. I mean, it was a total phony story. There are many of them. So when you say, does it affect me in terms of my thinking with respect to Judge Kavanaugh? Absolutely, because I've had it many times.
Well, for more, we're joined by Jessica Leeds, the woman Trump just referred to in his news conference, one of the 16 Trump accusers who decided to speak out as Donald Trump was running for president. Jessica Leeds says Donald Trump groped her in the first-class cabin of a commercial flight, tried to put his hand up her skirt. She's recently retired after working 30 years as a stockbroker. She's a mother of 2, grandmother of 8. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Jessica. It's great to have you with us. Before I get you to respond to Donald Trump, explain what happened to you for people who aren't familiar with what happened when you got on a commercial flight. When was it?
Oh, it was in the around 1980. And I, at this point, would think that everybody has heard about it. So
assume nothing.
Forgive me if to some degree it sounds like an old story. I was a traveling sales rep. I was on an airplane coming in from either Dallas or Atlanta. I don't remember which one, but it was a long flight. And the stewardess came back to me in the business section and asked me, would I be interested in coming up to first class? Worked for me. So I came on up, and it was the first 2 seats in the section, right against the bulkhead. There was a young man sitting there, blondish. He stuck his hand out, introduced himself as Donald Trump. Name meant nothing to me. While I was working out of Connecticut, New York and New York politics, New York society was totally out of my realm of knowledge. Dinner was served, and it was after dinner when, truly, all of a sudden, without a word, without a buy you leave, or about any kind of social conversation, he started groping me.
What does that mean? What did he do?
His hands were he was trying to kiss me. His hands were on my breast. He was, we were kind of wrestling, but I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything, so it was like this kind of kabuki theater in the silence. I remember thinking, why doesn't the guy across the aisle say something? Why doesn't the stewardess come back? But it seemed to go on forever, but of course it didn't.
He put his hand up your skirt?
Yes. He started putting his hand up my skirt. And that's when I, with effort, managed to wiggle my way out, grabbed my purse, and I went to the back of the airplane. And I sat there until the plane landed and was completely clear because I didn't want to run into him. And that's what happened.
You didn't tell a flight attendant?
I did not tell the flight attendant. I didn't tell the airlines. I didn't tell my boss. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody. I really kind of chalked it off that he was a jerk. And those were kind of the things that could happen on the road.
You bumped into him after that?
Yes, 4 years later in New York City. And by that time, I knew who he was. I knew his family's, because I was working for a charity, and it was very important to them to have the Trump come. And I was assigned to give out the table numbers. And Trump and his wife, Ivana, she was very pregnant at this point. She came up. Oh, it was a gala evening. All the designers. I got to meet all the designers. But here comes Trump. And now I'm remembering that whole situation, and that's what's flashing through my mind, but I'm not saying anything. And I hand him his table assignment, and he looks at me, and he says, I remember you. You were that woman from the airplane. And then he called me a very obscene name.
Starting with a C?
Yes.
4 letters?
Yes. And it was like I was suddenly all alone. It was a crowded room, but suddenly I felt so alone. It was like everybody sort of disappeared. And nothing more was said. He took his and went off his merry way, and I left as soon as I possibly could.
And what about, Jessica, if you could respond to Trump referencing this incident yesterday and calling it phony?
Yeah, well, it was a long time ago. And I'm frankly of the opinion, especially with Trump and his age, because men like that for them, it means nothing. It's like scratching an itch. It means nothing. They forget about it 2 seconds after it's happened. And women don't.
I want to go back to Trump during the campaign trail. This isn't the first time he's mentioned you. Going back to the campaign trail before he was president.
The only way they figure they can slow it down is to come up with people that are willing to say, oh, I was with Donald Trump in 1980. I was sitting with him on an airplane. And he went after me on the plane. Yeah, I'm going to go after. Believe me, she would not be my first choice, that I can tell you. Man.
There were Donald Trump's disgusting comments.
Well, he can't see past the age. He can't see past, which is, why sometimes pictures of me when at that time are brought up, because I'm a 76-year-old woman. Now he can't see past the hair and the wrinkles. But the fact remains that when he says, I wasn't pretty enough.
I mean, we know what he said because we have the videotape of him in the bus talking about how he cannot help himself, why he gropes women's genitals, which is exactly the description that you gave of what happened to you. But I wanted to also go to this issue that he keeps raising with Dr. Blasey Ford, saying we're talking about, and with Deborah Ramirez, decades ago, he says. Now, you too, what do you remember and what don't you? And how do you respond to that issue of memory? Let me go to Trump speaking at the news conference, disparaging, responding to the CBS reporter, Wei Jia-Jiang, questioning him.
Said that if what she said were as bad as she claims, surely her or her parents would have reported it. And just today you said you wouldn't.
Well, there is a truth. I mean, there is a chance that her parents could have reported it 36 years ago.
So my question is...
It doesn't mean they had to report it, because in some instances people keep it quiet. It's a very tough situation for a woman. There's no question about it. And in some cases they do report it. Frankly, had they reported it, it would have been pretty amazing, wouldn't it? But I guess they didn't, and that's okay. I'm not saying they had to report it, because it's a very personal thing. It's a very big problem. There's no question about it. Go ahead.
So this issue of memory and also why you wait, how long did it take you to reveal this?
I didn't start telling anybody, my family included, until 2015, when I realized that Trump was really going to run for president.
So for 35 years.
Exactly.
Almost the same amount of time as Dr. Blasey Ford.
Exactly. I had dismissed it. As I said, he was a jerk. But when I realized he was seriously running for president, then I thought, well, I want people to know. So I told my family. I told my friends. I told my neighbors. I told my book club. There were several groups when I would tell my story that I could tell. Some of them didn't believe me.
And the issue of details, what you remember and what you don't.
But people have a perfect right to say, well, that was a long time ago and maybe your memory is flawed. I respect that. But it still needs to be acknowledged, because how many women now in this Me Too movement? How many women have I talked to? During the first scrum, I went over the story so often that I found myself saying, oh, I can't tell it again. And I found myself asking the reporters, the crews, the people who would come with them, I would ask them, well, tell me about your story. And every single one of them had a story. Some of it minor, but they remembered.
What are the details?
With details, what they had on, how they got out of it. Some of it was as simple as, I didn't get a promotion because I wouldn't go out to lunch with this guy.
Well, in a sense, Dr. Blasey Ford's experience parallels your own in the sense that she also only came forward once Kavanaugh was about to be confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. And she also said that the experience drastically altered her life and that for a very long time she was afraid and ashamed to tell anyone the details. Would you say that's true of you as well, that it drastically altered your life?
No. Well, yes. I stopped wearing skirts, all right? I cut my hair extremely short and kept it short because I did not want to draw attention to my femininity as I was working. You make all these adjustments. I wouldn't go to a bar by myself. That was stupid. But you learn those things. And a 15-year-old kid who probably didn't tell her parents she was going to the party. She was thrilled to be asked. I mean, I can project what was going on. I haven't asked my daughter what's happened to her, but I'm sure it has. I haven't asked my granddaughter, who is a waitress, what she's had to tolerate. We have been so enculturated over the years, and I'm afraid it goes back. I was flippant this morning and said to the time we were chimpanzees. We've been so enculturated and so controlled that it's just recently that I think we're making a move. And I know we're asking a lot.
And your comment, finally, on President Trump being the one to disparage the accusers of Brett Kavanaugh. President Trump, of course, the one who chose Brett Kavanaugh, not that he knew this at the time.
Basically, Trump is incoherent. So he's all over the ballpark. As soon as an idea comes that he thinks he can defend.
But on this issue.
Yeah, well, but on this issue, he cannot, because he has no introspection for himself, fathom what the problem really is.
I'm going to leave it at that right now. We're going to go to break, and then we're also going to be joined once again by Lily Bernard, who's just back from Pennsylvania, where she was in the courtroom when Bill Cosby was sentenced. She's one of more than 60 women who accused Bill Cosby of sexual misconduct and rape. This is Democracy Now! Jessica Leeds, our guest, one of 16 women who've accused President Trump of sexual misconduct. She recently retired after working 30 years as a stockbroker. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute. Malombre, Bad Man by Lydia Mendoza. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. In addition to our discussion of what's taken place now with Judge Kavanaugh, the news that broke this week of Bill Cosby. Let's just talk about this week and what happened in a Pennsylvania courtroom. This week in Pennsylvania, Bill Cosby is behind bars after a Pennsylvania judge sentenced him to 3 to 10 years in prison. In April, a jury found Cosby guilty of 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault for drugging and sexually assaulting Andrea Constant, the former director of operations for the women's basketball team at Temple University. At Cosby's home in 2004, Constant is one of more than 60 women who've accused Cosby of sexual assaults dating back decades. Cosby had been out on bail since his conviction last spring. And on Tuesday, the Montgomery County Judge Stephen O'Neill ordered him to be jailed immediately. The judge also upheld a state board's finding that Cosby is a sexually violent predator, meaning Cosby will have to undergo monthly counseling and register as a sex offender with police for the rest of his life. Neighbors and schools will be notified of his address and crimes. So we're joined right now by Lily Bernard. She was in the courtroom this week when Cosby was sentenced. Now, Lily Bernard is a visual artist. She's an actor. She accused Bill Cosby of drugging and raping her in the early 90s when he mentored her in preparation for her guest starring role on The Cosby Show. She was our guest yesterday, where we talked quickly about what had taken place. This issue of remembering, talk about what happened to you and when you revealed it to people and the effect it had on you, Lily. You were not the reason Bill Cosby was in court.
That's right. And never in my life would I have imagined that the same week in which my serial rapist, who happens to be a mega mogul celebrity, is entered into state penitentiary for years, that a Supreme Court justice, the nominated Supreme Court justice, would be in a hearing where he has to face questions about sexual assault. I never thought that would happen. But I was on The Cosby Show, but during the mentoring stages of, in preparation of my guest starring role on The Cosby Show, Bill Cosby, once he gained my total trust, he drugged me and he raped me. And it took me years to come forward, to find the strength and the fortitude to come forward for multiple reasons that I would like to address. And this question, which internet trolls, the hired shills, the hired Cosby shills in the courtroom that have been harassing and assaulting us, and unfortunately even family members frequently ask me unthinkingly and sensitively, just shakes me to the core. Why did you wait so long? Why did you wait so long? And there are a plethora of reasons. And I would just like to just ramble through them really quickly to school people to understand. When Donald Trump said, in some instances, people keep quiet, he would have been more accurate had he said, in most incidences, people keep quiet, because government research shows that less than 30% of victims of sexual assault ever report a rape. That means most people don't report a rape. And why don't they report it? Okay. Rape is such an intimately invasive, violent crime where you have the sexual organ of a perpetrator piercing the reproductive organ of the victim or the rectum, and this, of course, can result in life-threatening disease, sexual transmitted disease. It can result in procreation, abortion, shame. And then you have victims often stating that when they go to the police, in the rare occasions that they do go to the police, when, less than 1 out of 3 go to the police, you have the police now just badgering the victim with a battery of blaming questions where the victim feels that she is being re-raped. And that is parallel. That happens again. That is echoed in the courtroom, the 3-ring circus of a courtroom where victims are slut-shamed and blamed and their characters assassinated.
And in your case, the power imbalance. You had just gone for an open call on the Bill Cosby Show.
That's right. And that's a very important point, because patriarchy has empowered itself since at least 1492. Upon that, they have relied upon that silence to sustain patriarchy, and they have relied upon, they have shafted dominant culture into believing rape myths, and rape myths are falsehoods, right? Which people believe as to how a rape victim should act.
So what happened at that time? You go for an open call. You meet Bill Cosby.
I go for an open call and I meet Bill Cosby, and I tell him, I thank him for the opportunity to audition as a stand-in. That's what it was, but I want to have a principal speaking role on The Cosby Show. He called me very quickly thereafter, and he endeared himself to me. This is another tactic that rape perpetrators use. He endeared himself not only to me, but to my extended family, spoke with my father in person, my mother on the phone, my cousins, my brother, and told them how much he loved me as a daughter and how he cared for me as a kid. He used to call me, "You're one of my kids, Bernard." So what he did then, very craftfully weaponized my own family against me, which often perpetrators do, because then they look at you with a side eye and doubt, and how could,
So you go on to the Bill Cosby show.
Yes.
After you allege that he raped you in his house, drugged and raped you.
Yes, that I did.
Let's go to this moment on TV, Lily Bernard, your guest starring appearance on the Bill Cosby show in the 8th and final season.
When the contractions reach 8 minutes apart, that's when you call me. Now, what did I just say?
Call you every 8 minutes.
Dr. Huxtable, your lab reports are waiting.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I guess I'm off.
Yes, more ways than one. Miss Minifield, I told you to call me when the contractions are 8 minutes apart.
I know, but they jumped from 10 to 4.
They jumped?
Last time I checked, they were 10 minutes. Now they're coming every 4 minutes.
Good. Now, Mrs. Minifield, listen to me carefully. Is your husband there?
He's running errands, but I can leave him a note.
So there you are, Lily Bernard, about to give birth, supposedly, on the Cosby Show. And you've already been raped, you claim, by Bill Cosby. You couldn't have this tried in a court because of the decades now.
Well, actually,
the statute of limitations?
Because the statute of limitations prevented the prosecutor from even considering to press charges, because the incident for which I spoke to the Atlantic City Police Department occurred just a few months outside of the statute of limitations. So all the evidence, the compelling evidence that I saved, all my victim testimonies were for naught.
This is astounding, this moment. What was it like for you to be on the set with Bill Cosby?
Right. Well, when you talk about the re-victimization that that precludes rape victims from speaking out, I feel it viscerally. My heart is racing right now. It's racing because looking at that is a very difficult thing to do. It reminds me of the deep betrayal. He had mentored me for quite a while before he drugged and raped me. So I had viewed him as a father figure. And that week of work was the most difficult week that I ever endured. He was violently abusive to me. There was a big, huge blowout the night before during the dress rehearsal that production assistants witnessed, and at the end of the taping, when the hundreds of people in the audience were applauding, and I was feeling like I was about to faint because of what had just happened a couple of months prior, where I had come home drugged and sexually assaulted, in this case, to my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband, and we both confronted Bill Cosby together, and he threatened serious consequences to our life. And I'm standing there as the audience is applauding, barely able to sustain myself. My knees were trembling and weak, and I thought I was going to pass out. And he said to me with a smirk, because, in the courthouse, he laughed so heartily while the victims cried that you could see his shoulders bounce up and down. And with that same kind of sardonic, unapologetic scorn, he said to me, "Fool them again. Fool them again," as in the audience, because they did not know what I knew, that this phony philanthropy, this moralizing, that Dr. Huxtable is not Bill Cosby. And I knew that Bill Cosby is nothing but a lying, duplicitous, cowardly serial rapist. I knew that. They didn't know that. And that's what he meant by fool them again.
And will you be watching today's hearing with Kavanaugh and Dr. Blasey Ford?
Yes, in a few minutes, right? I will be watching, and I will be watching through a different gaze. Patriarchy has empowered itself, right, by disempowering women. So they have duped society into viewing women through a lens of devaluation, through a lens of that women lack credibility. And so I'm going to be looking at it through a different gaze. But yes, I'm looking forward to just being terribly disappointed at all the rape myths that are going to be flung around. And I'm going to be watching. It's just going to be another example of this just duplicity of the means through which patriarchy has continued to empower itself, which is through the disempowerment of women.
We want to thank you so much for being with us, Lily Bernard, visual artist and actor. She accused Bill Cosby of drugging and raping her in the early 90s when he mentored her for her guest starring role on The Cosby Show. And again, we want to thank Jessica Leeds, who accused Donald Trump, before he was president, decades ago, of attacking her on a plane as he sat next to her in first class. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, as we turn right now to New Haven, Connecticut.
One of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh's 3 named sexual assault accusers is Deborah Ramirez, who says he exposed himself to her, thrusting his genitals in her face, at a drunken dorm party in 1983-1984 school year when she and Kavanaugh were both freshmen at Yale University. Kavanaugh is a graduate of both Yale University and the Yale Law School. Other alumni include Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Anita Hill. More than 2,200 Yale women have now signed a letter of support for Ramirez, and men have signed a similar letter. On Monday, Yale Law School faculty canceled 31 classes to allow more than 260 of their students to join a protest in support of Ramirez. That's nearly 40% of the school's student body. They began with a moment of silence to recognize assaults that go unreported.
Among those to address the protest was Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who's also an alum of Yale Law School. Dean Heather Gerken released a statement saying the accusations against Kavanaugh are, quote, rightly causing deep concern at Yale Law School and across the country. Meanwhile, a Yale Law School professor who wrote a New York Times op-ed in support of Kavanaugh's nomination when it was first announced has now called for an investigation of the sexual assault claims. In a new op-ed in the Yale Daily News Monday titled Second Thoughts on Kavanaugh, Professor Akhil Amar wrote, I believe these accusations deserve the best and most professional investigation possible, even if that means a brief additional delay on the ultimate vote on Judge Kavanaugh, and even if that investigation delay imperils his confirmation. This is Amar on CNN.
I have second thoughts because a second issue has arisen, and it's an issue about which, frankly, I don't have the facts. I don't think any American yet has the facts.
That's Professor Amar. For more, we go to Yale University, where we're joined by Samantha Pelz, a second-year Yale law student who helped organize Monday's protest. Welcome to Democracy Now! Samantha, it's great to have you with us. Talk about what you're doing at Yale. Brett Kavanaugh, Yale alum.
So, as you previously said, on Monday we hosted a sit-in. The first 30 minutes we sat in silence, took in the silence that suffuses women whose allegations go unreported, sometimes for decades, as your 2 previous guests spoke about. After that, we did a teach-in, and we were joined by Senator Blumenthal. We discussed Kavanaugh's jurisprudence, educating ourselves and as law students and other students who had joined us about what the stakes are in this confirmation process. And then a bit later, we did a walkout and discussed sexual assault allegations in our community and throughout American society as a group. It was probably one of the most powerful things I've ever witnessed at my time at Yale Law School.
Samantha Pelz, could you talk about what you think the significance is of this protest at Yale University, where, of course, Brett Kavanaugh is an alum?
Well, as you said, a Yale law degree is a stamp of approval. It's a position of power. It's a piece of paper that you can take into the world and show people I am qualified to do things. And we really, really want to appeal to the highest values of our institution, we want our alumni to appeal to the highest values, and we're attempting to hold both our school and our alumni accountable for the power that they hold. We believe that that power has a corresponding responsibility, and we want to broadcast to the world that we understand that responsibility, that we're interrogating that responsibility, and we demand that our alumni take that responsibility
Samantha,
as well.
what are you calling for now?
Our protest on Monday was primarily about 3 issues. The first was to support Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and the other accusers that have come forward. These women are incredibly brave, and as you've spoken about, this echoes in the hearings 27 years ago with Anita Hill. We want the Senate to get it right this time. We are opposing the hasty and incomplete hearing process that is going on now. You know, in law school, we learned that one of the fundamental principles of the legal system is that to the best of your abilities, you engage with and investigate the facts before you come to any decision. And we're demanding that our senators do that in this instance.
Well, Samantha Peltz, will you be watching today? And then what are the plans of the students, also staff? The latest news we have, 2,800 women have signed the letter in support of Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, Debbie Ramirez. They were both freshmen at Yale when she says he thrust his genitals in her face at a drunken Yale party.
We will be watching the hearings all day today at Yale Law School, and we'll continue speaking out, speaking to the press, until we feel like there is a full and fair investigation of these allegations. You know, Brett Kavanaugh is not in a criminal court. He is being vetted to be arisen to the highest court in the land, and we feel like his qualifications need to be thoroughly examined before or if that happens.
Samantha Peltz, I want to thank you so much for being with us, second-year Yale law student who helped organize a protest Monday to demand a full, fair, impartial investigation into the allegations against the school's alum Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Again, Debbie Ramirez, also a student at Yale. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, President Trump spent the week at the United Nations. He called for sanctions, more sanctions against Venezuela. We'll talk with Vijay Prashad. Stay with us.
There are people who say we ought to give you a chance, but there's not a chance in hell that we'll sit back and watch you try to turn back the clock and just sigh and say, oh well. No, we'll fight you every step of the way. You're playing a losing game, and you'll be the one with nothing to say. But I'm not gonna say your name. I'm sick of your name. I've heard it enough. I'd rather not hear it anymore. But you're wrong if you think we can look the other way.
Not going to say your name by entrance here on Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end the hour with Venezuela. President Nicolás Maduro addressed the United Nations General Assembly Wednesday, just one day after Trump accused him of corruption and announced new sanctions against members of his inner circle, including Maduro's wife, Celia Flores. This is Trump speaking to the UN General Assembly Tuesday.
Not long ago, Venezuela was one of the richest countries on earth. Today, socialism has bankrupted the oil-rich nation and driven its people into abject poverty. In that spirit, we ask the nations gathered here to join us in calling for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. Today, we are announcing additional sanctions against the repressive regime, targeting Maduro's inner circle and close advisors.
Trump said Wednesday that he would be willing to meet with President Maduro and that all options are on the table to help end the political, economic and humanitarian chaos in Venezuela. This is Maduro responding to Trump Wednesday night.
A pesar de todas las diferencias
Despite all of the differences, which could be considered abysmal, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro Moros, would be willing, I am willing, to reach out my hand to the president of the United States and sit down to talk about the issues of bilateral differences and the issues of our region.
The UN visit comes nearly 2 months after Maduro survived a coup attempt when 2 drones loaded with explosives detonated above him as he gave a nationally televised speech at a military event in Caracas. It was the first known attempted assassination by drone strike against a sitting head of state. Earlier this month, the New York Times reported Trump administration officials held multiple secret meetings with rebel Venezuelan military officers last year to discuss plans to overthrow Venezuelan President Maduro. The secret meetings about a possible coup included a Venezuelan military commander who's on a U.S. government sanctions list of corrupt Venezuelan officials. The Times reports the discussion stalled after Trump administration officials reportedly decided not to assist in a military coup in Venezuela. Well, for more, we're joined by Vijay Prashad here in the studio. Director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, chief editor of Leftward Books. He's also the chief correspondent of Globetrotter, author of The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South, and co-editor of Land of Blue Helmets, The United Nations and the Arab World. Welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. So, Vijay, you were last night at an event at Riverside Church. Thousands of people packed in. Frankly, I couldn't get in. I was right there. You were inside, though. And there was a surprise appearance by President Maduro. He had just addressed the United Nations and said what we heard him say. Trump was there earlier and said he's imposing more sanctions against Venezuela. And this all comes after this coup attempt. Talk about the significance of what's happening, why the U.S. is taking the approach it does to Venezuela and Maduro's response.
Well, let's bring Iran into the conversation, Amy, and it's great to be back. There have been 2 attacks on 2 military parades in August in Venezuela and this month in Iran. And the United States government has not said anything of sympathy, even though about 30 people were killed in the attack in Iran. In fact, on the day of the attack in Iran, Trump's advisor, Rudy Giuliani, reiterated a call for the overthrow of the Iranian government. I mean, what we're seeing is quite curious. At the United Nations, Mr. Trump apparently suggested that state sovereignty, in other words, the integrity of a state, a member state of the United Nations, should be the main principle by which governments, take care of their policies. In other words, he was defending what some call economic nationalism. But when it comes to places like Iran or Venezuela, the principle of state sovereignty is not respected at all. What we see instead is a kind of gunboat diplomacy, but really without diplomacy. I mean, it's mainly gunboat. And that's been the attitude towards Venezuela. It's been so harsh, the economic war against Venezuela, that Nicolas Maduro has not been able to come and address the UN General Assembly since 2015. So this is the first time that Maduro, under immense pressure from the United States, was able to come to the opening of the UN General Assembly and speak to the Parliament of Nations, as it were.
And so can you talk about, Vijay, what are the conditions in Venezuela today?
Well, the conditions are quite difficult for lots of people. It has been under immense sanctions that are as harsh as they have been on Cuba at the worst time. Plus, of course, commodity prices have decreased dramatically. In other words, particularly oil prices. And in this situation, the Venezuelan government has had much of its options reduced. So the situation is bad. I mean, there's inflation and so on. But it's highly exaggerated in the media, particularly in the United States. I mean, just 2 months ago, there was a march of farmers, for instance, from around the country to Caracas. They had come with a set of demands. And the government met the farmers. They made some provisions about how to tackle the agricultural crisis inside Venezuela. By the way, an agricultural crisis that's global. I mean, after all, there was a march of farmers in India at the same time. The government was not able to act upon the proposals. Farmers went on hunger strike. Government met with them again, and then they came to an agreement. What I'm just trying to say is, of course, there's difficulty. Let's not duck that. But this difficulty is not entirely endogamous. It's not coming from inside Venezuela, as if, Venezuelan socialism is the culprit, as Trump said. I mean, this is a country that is under a kind of war. And we have to see it like that. We have to understand the situation in Iran as well as a place under siege. Again, this is not unfamiliar to what's happening even in Argentina, where the peso has collapsed against the dollar. So there's a focus when we talk about places like Venezuela, Iran, not seeing that there's actually been a global hit against countries like Turkey, Argentina, South Africa, India, as the U.S. interest rates have risen. For a series of reasons, there's a real problem in these countries.
Is the U.S. working with Latin American countries against Venezuela, like Colombia, where it's going to be building a number of bases, like Honduras, Brazil? Are they forming a bloc?
Well, they have already a bloc. It's called the Lima Group, and it was set up a couple of years ago in Lima, Peru. It's interesting, though, Amy, that the United States has been pushing not just Trump, but also Obama for a kind of military solution. Trump is far more aggressive in his language. Again, yesterday in the United Nations, he said that the military option is not off the table. He said that in the corridors.
Well, on Wednesday, 5 conservative Latin American governments and Canada's Prime Minister met in New York, signed a complaint with the International Criminal Court asking to investigate Maduro on charges of crimes against humanity.
This is true. It's the first time governments have done this. But just to finish about the Lima Group, is despite the fact that the United States has been pushing for a military option, the Lima Group this week released a statement where they signed on to the statement saying they are opposed to a military intervention. Even Colombia, which didn't sign the statement, said it agrees with the spirit of the statement. It is, of course, true that 5 of these countries have, approached the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Now, but look at the hypocrisy of it. Mr. Trump has just attacked the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He's questioned its jurisdiction, and then a couple of days later, his close Latin American allies and the Canadians put this complaint forward. Amy, it's so hard to take the world at face value these days.
Well, let's go to Trump speaking about the International Criminal Court during his UN address on Tuesday.
The United States will provide no support in recognition to the International Criminal Court. As far as America is concerned, the ICC has no jurisdiction, no legitimacy, and no authority. The ICC claims near universal jurisdiction over the citizens of every country, violating all principles of justice, fairness, and due process. We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy.
So that's Trump speaking just on Tuesday about the International Criminal Court, saying that he will not relinquish American sovereignty to a global bureaucracy.
I mean, we are in a situation now, Nermeen, where the United States government is becoming increasingly isolated. And I think Americans need to understand that. Whether it's the peace agreement in Korea, where the United States played almost no role, or it's the issue of isolating Iran and Venezuela, there's immense pushback against U.S. policy, not only from the Europeans, where I think it's important to say that they are very disheartened by the Iran policy, but also by other countries associated with the non-aligned movement. Even close allies. Trump named Israel, India, Saudi Arabia, and Poland as the friends of the United States. It's an extraordinary small list. But even India is not entirely given to the idea that there should be harsh policy versus Iran or Venezuela.
And Saudi Arabia?
And Saudi Arabia, let's not talk about Saudi Arabia, Amy. That we can go on for about, at least a half an hour. It's such a complicated place. I don't even see why we take it so seriously.
Well, that's good, because we will do a post show, and we will post this online in the WebEx column with Vijay Prashad, who's director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and chief editor of Leftward Books, chief correspondent of Globetrotter, author of The Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Has a broadcast engineer opening full-time in New York. Apply at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Tammy Warnoff, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Libby Rainey. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks so much for joining us.